This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. The way we discover, consume, and trust news is changing faster than at any point in modern history. Audiences are no longer loyal to platforms, distribution is no longer owned, and technology, especially AI, is reshaping not just how content is delivered, but how media organizations think about their very own purpose and sustainability. Today's guest sits right at the intersection of media, technology, and strategy. Allison McHenry is a seasoned media and tech leader who has spent her career helping news organizations navigate digital transformation, audience strategy, and the hard business questions that come with building sustainable, mission driven media in a fragmented world. In this conversation, we will talk about how people are actually consuming news today and how distribution strategies are being rethought from the ground up through the lens of Allison's story and experience as a technology and product leader in this space. This is a thoughtful, honest conversation about the future of news and what it will take to build media organizations that truly serve people in the years ahead. Allison, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mateo. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Allison, what do you do today for a living?
So I'm the CTO at Daily Kos, which is a politically progressive blog news company. We are focused on the United States, but we have readers from all over the world.
Going right to the discussion that we will have today, Allison, are people skipping media platforms entirely and consuming news through social media feeds or AI chatbots, and why?
This is a question that I think a lot of media brands are struggling with. Many companies are seeing year-over-year declines in traffic because now Google has Gemini. People are asking Google, headline news, Gemini will just answer. There's no reason to click through to any particular brand. News organizations are really struggling with how to create that brand loyalty and that one-to-one relationship with the consumer, which is so important for survival in a world where the first interface to the whole internet is basically ChatGPT now for a lot of people.
So, with this new reality, how are media companies rethinking distribution?
Yeah. There's obviously always been off-platform distribution. So YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Substack, all of those off-platform locations have always been important to media companies, and the Daily Beast had their first profitable year in 2025, focusing on monetizing YouTube and Substack. So those avenues are important. They continue to be important. But our owned and operated sites are also, still a critical asset, both for our own credibility and to, again, create that one-to-one relationship with consumers. So we're thinking a lot about how do we create and sustain community? How do we provide a unique value? Headline news is often considered a commodity now. You can get the same news story from the Washington Post and the New York Times and your local newspaper. And, there's no particular reason to read that headline news on one website versus another. So what is the unique angle that we bring is something that we think a lot about as well, our editorial voice.
What does it actually mean today for a company to own its audience?
That's a good question. There's different brands have different levels of loyalty, right? So there are people that, I will always go to the Washington Post to read, this particular writer. And those people have, a really strong loyalty. Kara Swisher is one person that often comes up in conversation about, this journalist who's created a brand identity for herself. She has her podcast. Michael Barbara has a podcast for the New York Times. These people are, have their own, as journalists, have their own brand. And if they went to Substack, people would follow them to Substack. They would read their articles. They have a direct one-to-one relationship with the customer. Owning your audience for a media brand, I think, is something that we talk a lot about. Daily Kos is 70% sustained by donations from users. We rely really heavily on our audience to keep the company afloat. And if we didn't provide value that was unique to them, the company wouldn't exist. There would be no reason for, the company to even even have a website. What people come back for is they come back for people's comments. They come back for the social relationships that they have with other users. They come back for the social relationships that they have with our writers. We are thinking about ways to expand this, having our writers interact more in the comments with our users, thinking about value adds for subscribers, maybe a Zoom with our founder, having these special experiences that only we can provide. And I think that's something that we're really trying to lean into in 2026.
It's interesting. It's as you were saying, it's sort of uh Patreon or OnlyFans media version, if you will, kind of like a fan subscriber access only.
Yeah, exactly. And having, individual writers create their own individual brand, then they can take that brand to another media company. Like there's no like that isn't necessarily something that the company that pays their salary like owns, right? That's their own name.
Right.
Um, so for writers, I mean, it's definitely been a very interesting, last few years where there's been a big shift to freelancing. There's been a lot of local news outlets have closed. Programmatic ad revenue has really fallen off a cliff. So, that sort of passive revenue stream is really not as dependable as it was 10 years ago. Um, People, sort of did this race to the bottom with programmatic ad revenue where it's, the more ads you show on the site, if you could just like drive people crazy enough, that you'll make some money every time they come visit you, but then they'll never come back, right?
Yeah.
So I think the pendulum has really shifted with ads to think more about the user experience and not driving people, just straight up off your site. Um, and with AI, something that we're talking a lot about in the industry is, is there going to be a similar race to the bottom with content monetization?
Hmm.
If we do get to a point where we are striking deals individually or collectively with LLM providers such as OpenAI or Anthropic, um, that content is going to have some sort of value. And unless you are, writing specialized medical articles, every 2 weeks or something like that, that there is a type of content that has a high, like let's call it CPM, a high intrinsic value to an LLM. Um, but most content doesn't. And if, we're all, sort of unifying and saying, okay, charge 5 cents per, crawl for, these crawlers, you know, well, if somebody else undercuts that and now they're saying, okay, well, we'll give you content for 4 cents, like is our content, like how is that sustainable? So we're thinking a lot about, what is the value of content also, and like how do we exploit that in a way that's interesting?
Do you think AI can be used to better understand audiences and to reach people where it matters, when it matters, with content that talks to them and serves them?
A lot of people find the AI interface to the internet to be great for them for a lot of reasons. I use it to, here's a contract, please surface, any points of concern or whatever. I'm not going to sit there
Yeah.
and like, I'm not a lawyer, like I can't necessarily do that as effectively. Um, Doing that sort of work that either you're not an expert in or is very time consuming. Um, and people also, ask it for context. They ask it for, additional references. And I don't think it's good enough yet to replace like actual human journalists just because, there's still hallucinations. That's still a problem. Um, you know, there's an aging problem. Like, a lot of the content is old, if it's being trained on user-generated content like ours or like Reddit's, people have their opinions and those may or may not be like factually based, et cetera. So, I think there is still a value to human, generated
Mm.
journalism. And that trust equation is something that is another thing that is just really important for media brands to emphasize, that we are people, we are writing this for you, we have an understanding, of all of the inputs that went into the story. We can talk to you more about why it's important. Um, the the follow-up question, I mean, there's some media organizations that I think are doing a really great job with that. Washington Post, for example, has a Ask the Post link that opens their LLM and like that's been trained on their corpus. So it is, very factual and very useful. I've enjoyed that, myself to get, dive deeper. So the journalist can pitch a story at a more advanced level. And then somebody who isn't really understanding everything that the journalist is saying can then ask the chatbot and, get more context. And I think people have, had good feedback about that. Um, but I think that there's going to have to be some creativity on the part of media brands and some investment on things that may or may not be effective. You're gonna have like anytime you're trying to create new products, some of them won't work, right? So, there needs to be an appetite for failure, to some extent to try things that are new.
So differentiation is super important, but at the same time, it feels, at least the narrative is, the attention span keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and we are watching sort of the same things and getting fed up, fed by social media by so much, right? So I think where I'm trying to go is, if differentiation matters so much and the value added journalism matters so much, how does that plug along with attention span going down and people just consuming things in a, are we consuming things in a dumber way? Do you think so? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Daily Kos is a model that relies, today on long form writing. And we, about two-thirds of our content is written by our community members that are writing long form, by and large, long form content. Um, Most of our audience is older. So these are not, teenagers who are writing, these long form blog posts. Um, and for content like ours, if people start using AI to write it, then all of the value of it goes away, right?
Yeah,
Like, I mean, having
yeah,
some machine, like, give an opinion, like who cares about what machine's opinion on anything, right? Um, so that we're very conscious of that, threat to the quality of the content on our site. The attention span and the long form thing. I mean, some media brands are leaning into that by leaning into short form video. I think you can see that also, again in the Washington Post. TikTok is a place where a lot of younger people, will get news. And I think, honestly, there's a element of self-protection in some of this. Like sometimes the news feels so bad that people can't
right,
consume a lot of it,
right.
And in the same way that like a lot of brands don't necessarily want their brand associated with bad news. So monetizing news becomes harder. So people want their brands next to the sports scores and the entertainment scores and like the things that don't evoke that feeling of like despair that so much of the that the modern news cycle evokes in so many people. So I think it's understandable that people want to protect themselves from just what can feel like an overwhelming fire hose of bad news, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's, that makes sense to me. Um, I think that there is still an appetite for long form content. I think you see it in The Atlantic. I think you see it in like the New York Times Magazine, where you do have these longer pieces that, sometimes go viral and,
yeah.
people are talking about them. And like The Economist had one about daycare, I think that, kept surfacing in every feed I have for like 3 months. So those the appetite for that still exists. It's, I think, smaller people, a smaller number of people, a lot of them are older, and you just need to make sure that you're like pitching the content, that they actually want to read versus like, oh my gosh, here's another like story about how terrible everything is, and like I just really
Yeah.
don't want that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, Consolidation is another recurring theme in the media industry. Do you think scale now is a requirement for survival, or is there still room for smaller, more focused publishers to win?
I love that question. I think, a lot of the really bigger successful media brands have financial reserves. The New York Times is a family-owned business. Family is billionaires, like the Times is going to survive, right?
Yeah,
Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. That's not going anywhere unless he wants to sell it for some reason. Um, Even the Daily Beast, which I was at last year, is part of the consortium that's owned by IAC, which is an internet holding company that has many other brands, including Vimeo, Ask.com, People.com. They have a number of brands. So the Daily Beast didn't need to be profitable on its own. Um, So for a lot of these small brands, the question is like, can we partner with a larger organization? Can we develop these financial reserves? Um, for small brands like the Daily Kos, which are independent, that's where, we have this real reliance on our users, on our readers, our subscribers, our donors,
Mm.
because without them, there just isn't, a website. And it really does feel a little like the public radio model where it's like, you have these people like, you're a member for $5 a month, for $10 a month, you get a hat, like that's like that sort of thing where it's like, you are the community is the reason for the website. If the community doesn't exist, the website doesn't exist. And if we get to the point where there just isn't enough of a demand, yes, those small media companies will go away, and we have seen a lot of consolidation in the industry. You know, Vice gone, Geo Media gone.
Yeah, yeah. What do you like the most and the least about the news media industry?
Well, I was an English major in college before pivoting into software. So I've always been interested in reading and writing and thinking, and I think that is just a very important element of a functioning society. I think you know, like there's still a part of me that's idealistic enough to think that holding power to account by shedding light on the things that are happening in the world and the discrepancies between what people say, um, is very important socially. So I've been in the media industry kind of off and on for most of my career. And, the financial struggles and the business challenges, you know, the social need for a functioning media doesn't go away. So there has been a shift in some cases to a nonprofit model where, it's actually like, people are making charitable contributions to their, news media. People have talked about like a government funded model. But then in the United States, obviously, we're seeing like, PBS like just went out of business because the government stopped funding it.
Yeah.
So that's not even a reliable, source anymore. Um, and that has me very worried. Like I think society will be worse off if we can't find a way to solve the business problem of how to create a healthy, functioning, you know, media voice. I think it's just really, really important.
Um, s- you got me thinking about that, and I was just going to ask a follow-up, but it's just a hard problem that, and we were talking about it, that it's not like there's an easy answer to it. And if you had it, that will be already, running its way. But let's zoom out a little bit to your personal journey and how has your role as a tech leader evolved into strategically leading product and business outcomes, right? Not just technology, but I love how you are in both places, and maybe there's that part about you loving so much media and the industry and your background as an English major, and reading and writing, and how you think about it.
Yeah, well, I started off, as an engineer. I worked as an individual contributor engineer for the first, 20 years of my career. I moved into management when I was at Priceline, which is a travel site. And at the time, they were using an integrated technology that made them have to redeploy the website every time they wanted to change anything. And I was like, wait a second, there's this thing called separation of concerns where you can have the front end over here and the back end over here. And, let me try it. And my boss was like, all right, I'll give you a team of two people. You can try it on things that don't touch any money. So like the thank you page, like the account page, like that's things you can try it on. It worked great. Our metric for success was calls to the help desk. Like if people were confused about whether or not their purchase went through, that was a problem that Priceline had at the time. Um, those went down. Everyone was happy. I like being a manager. Things went on the happy path. My job right after Priceline was at Vox Media, which at the time, digital publishing was just, the sky was the limit. Everything was on the way up. And I took on a role there running the video engineering team. So it was during the first like pivot to video moment where Facebook wanted everything to be video, so all the publishers like kind of scrambled around to do video more. Um, and I worked with a third party to do like the media asset management system and the media content management system. From there, I went to the New York Times and started off as the director of engineering on their games team. And at that time, New York Times Games was 12 people. We had just, started solving the product problem of the crossword puzzle is too hard. People are intimidated by it. They think they have to be really smart to solve it. It takes a long time. What else could we offer people that, they could enjoy doing as a break from the news? And grew games from 12 people to 40 people. Eventually took over all of the non-news New York Times products. So the cooking team, the games team, the kids team, the audio team, and the parenting team. Um, at that time, there was a huge appetite for, 0 to 1 ideas. The thinking there was, cooking and games kind of had come out of left field as a huge win for the Times. There was a lot of questions at first about cooking, like there's so many free recipe sites. Who's going to pay for a recipe site? Well, it turns out a lot of people are going to pay for a recipe site that doesn't have a bunch of ads in it, and the recipes are good and vetted and tested, and there's nice pictures. People liked it, so they continued to invest in that. Um, and games was a question of more like M&A, like, were there any acquisitions out there? So I left right before Wordle was acquired. So I was not part of that. That was the rocket ship that made New York Times Games take off. But before that, we were also doing a bunch of M&A work. And then audio was about the podcasting team. Kids and parenting were recently shut down. There just wasn't enough of a user base willing to pay a subscription in addition to the New York Times like news subscription, which was the metric that they were looking for. And then from the Times, I went to Meta, where I was running the profile team on the Facebook app, and then became CTO of the Daily Beast. And I would say that my transition to like product thinking really started at the Times, where it's like, you really just couldn't separate the technical, like how things are built from the product of like, what are we building? Like you just needed the technical expertise as to like, should we invest in this area? But also, the product, concept of like, is there an audience for this idea? Um, Facebook was probably more like strictly engineering. But then at the Daily Beast, when I started there as a VP of engineering, and there were like in my brief tenure there, I was only there for a year. There was a bunch of kind of business restructurings, and I wound up leading all of product data, QA, design, and engineering at the Daily Beast. And I wound up leaving there and going to Daily Kos after I was recruited there. And again, like the media industry has been so turbulent that, I don't know if times had been different. Like they
Yeah.
may have needed a more like focused engineering leader, but there becomes a time where it's like you just have so many years in this space that like not taking advantage of, everything that I've seen over the course of, a long career would be a shame. Like that would be
Yeah.
like probably not in their interest. Um, and I feel really good about like using technology as a forcing function to push how product leaders think about what's possible. Newsweek just last week launched an AI-driven homepage where they want it to be customized for everybody who comes there, and it learns from user behavior. And I was talking to Bharat, who's the CPO there, about how he did that, and he was like, "No, it was all like my in-house team of engineers. We developed this because we had this idea, this product idea, that people would be more sticky if they were, interacting with a homepage that learned about what they wanted." And I think that there's still a lot of opportunity for that.
Yeah.
And if people are, thinking a little outside the box of what's possible.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. You have an amazing career. Allison, one last final and random question to you. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Um, I'm looking over at my stack of things on the desk here. Well, I have a couple of things. Um, I have a strategy book that I'm reading.
Okay.
Playing to Win, which I like. I have Will Larson's Engineering Executives Primer, which you may be able to see. Will Larson is a tremendous strategic thinker. I really enjoy everything he writes. And then I'm reading The Lion Women of Tehran, which is about the Iranian Revolution
Oh,
fiction.
wow.
Really great book. Highly recommend it.
Are you reading that because of everything that's going on right now in Iran, or were you already reading that before all of the latest demonstrations in Iran?
No, that was just coincidental. Just, fiction that I happened to pick up and be interested in.
Do you um do you read many books at a time always?
I usually have like three or four going at the same time.
Do you randomly pick each one? Like, when do you read during the day?
I really love reading. I'm an evening reader, and for my business books and my like, kind of just learn more about what I'm doing and how I should be doing it. Um, those I'll pick up like sometimes during the workday if I have, 45 minutes between meetings, time
Yep.
for a good couple of chapters, and then like, sometimes they'll reference something online, and I'll be like at my computer anyway and like looking stuff up, while I'm doing that. Um, and the fiction books are just, for fun, so nights and weekends.
Evening. Do you have a favorite spot, like a sofa or anything, or whatever?
I read in bed usually.
Nice. Are you thinking, have you written anything, or are you thinking about writing? Do you have that itch?
I wrote a couple of pieces on medium.com earlier this year, and that's really satisfying because people do read it and then they'll like comment on it, and like that makes you feel really good. I would love to rate on Daily Kos, but I don't because I'm a staff member and I don't want people taking it too seriously.
Right.
Like this is actually some sort of pronouncement from somebody who knows something, like rather than just a person who's impacted by, all the events that are happening around us.
Right. Very good. Alison, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and I hope that we can do it again in the future.
Thanks again, Mateo. Have a great weekend.